Hello learners, welcome back to this course on Sociology of Media and Communication. Today we are going to start with the last unit of this course, Unit 5, and it is Media and Social Change. Today's lecture is lecture number 35 and we are going to talk about media access and childhood. The purpose of this unit is to particularly trace social changes and transformations in relationship to mediated changes and processes. So, we will explore the relationship between media and social change through several examples drawn from a variety of social contexts. One of the key characteristics of this course has been that it has tried to balance theoretical and empirical perspectives using case studies from both the global and the national context. Now, today we are going to start by talking about Sonia Livingstone's work, Children and the Internet, Great Expectations, Challenging Realities. I told you in a previous lecture that Livingstone is one of the most renowned media scholars, and we will go through her work to understand how the experience of childhood itself has changed because of also the mediated changes. Now, a very quick recap of what has been happening in the media landscape is that it has been commercialized, as we have been discussing, and it now operates on a transnational than a national scale. We also see that mass communication is an obsolete concept transformed by the growth of interactive, personalized, mobile and social media. We do not have the kind of mass media that Adorno and Horkheimer were talking about in their times. Instead, we have moved on to more interactive media, and Livingstone's work has also discussed the transformation of the audience from a mass audience to an interactive audience. Convergence is making it harder to actually distinguish different media because you have coexistence of different media forms, and information forms as they intersect and hybridize, they develop into different kinds of forms. There are converging text, technologies, everyday social habits, practices and social institutions. This is something that we have discussed throughout the course. By the mid to the late 1990s, the internet was fast becoming an everyday technology, particularly in the developed countries, and reaching sizable proportions of homes, schools and workplaces. The ways in which the internet is becoming embedded in everyday life, it also raises questions about access and inequalities, for instance digital divide, a phrase that all of you may be familiar with, about the nature and quality of the internet use, about the implications for young people's social and educational development, and also about the balance between the risks and opportunities as against also the dangers of the internet, especially when it comes to children. It is also often argued that children appear to be more flexible and creative users than adults, having fewer established routines or habits and being oriented towards development, innovation and change, which is why Livingstone would argue that children need to be particularly thought of when we are thinking about media. As the transition is made from the family of origin also towards a wider peer culture, young people find that the media, especially mobile media and the internet, and all of us, particularly young people, now use devices, they offer a valued resource for constructing their identity and also for mediating social relationships. These become very important for young people who find a very different world itself within their devices. They develop online competencies and literacies which exceed those of their parents, proudly labeling themselves the internet generation, and also mirror popular rhetoric regarding youthful cyber kids, digital natives or the digital generation. So, we have children and young people embodying these perspectives of what they would like to believe would be the internet generation or the digital generation. The integration of digital media into daily life is also transforming the traditional notions of childhood play and socialization. A very simple example is those of the video games in terms of how they have now become a very ubiquitous part of childhood, which did not really happen some years back. children increasingly blend online and offline activities, impacting how they learn, interact and spend leisure time. Their leisure is also mediated because they are using forms of media. Online gaming and virtual worlds are also common forms of play which influence the social dynamics and creativity. Now, when we think about young people and their childhood experiences in this manner, where one notices that media has transformed and there is an entry of media into young people's lives, particularly in their childhood, we also need to then ask this question that can platform literacy protect the vulnerable young people when there are risks that the social media platforms possess. Now, platform literacy is this idea that you have the knowledge and awareness of how platforms function. Now, in most cases, most people will not have the platform literacy that we are talking about, but in certain families where parents are educated, especially digitally educated, they might have this kind of platform literacy. So, therefore, what Livingstone and others in this study that we are going to discuss do is primarily ask this question that when we think about young people, does platform literacy protect them? They have done a qualitative study of young people who have mental health difficulties, and they wanted to understand their digital experiences and also identify whether their digital literacy helps them cope with their online problems. So, this is a study of young people, and the findings reveal that young people's encounters with online risk are actually amplified by the platform's promotion of trending and viral content and intensified through the personalization of content, which can trigger the individual vulnerabilities. So, one notices that while the young people may possess digital and platform literacy, it does not protect them against the risk that these online platforms possess, because their vulnerabilities are amplified by personalized content triggering them as well as by promoting trending and viral content. Now, these twin processes, they are actually seen as risky affordances, and young people, they are becoming very hyper vigilant to understand these affordances, and they do take anticipatory and remedial action. You may have seen that Instagram may have a trigger warning attached to a particular kind of content, with this assumption that if somebody does not want to watch it because it may be triggering to them, they can avoid it. There is hyper vigilance. In that sense, young people also use these features. They have platform literacy, which is digital literacy, responding to the challenges posed by the architecture, design, business models, etc. of the platforms, as well as how their algorithm functions. We had discussed in a previous lecture about platformization in terms of how media has become increasingly governed by platforms, and therefore, it is all the more crucial to look at how young people connect with these platforms. Now, young people, they gain platform literacy by actually critically examining and comparing social media platforms for their risky features at the interface, business operation and also user support. Now, these are ways in which young people see which platform to use, which not to use, and then they make their decision in terms of the comfort and the idea that they have of a platform. Now, this learning, it is also facilitated by peer discussions, where they discuss with each other, shared experimentation, reflexive deliberation about the digital relating to their individual experiences. So, in a way, they try to also use the online communities, peer discussions, etc., to think about how should they be accessing social media platforms. However, they expect society to support them through improved digital literacy education, clinical support, platform regulation and design, and most of it actually does not happen because we do not have that kind of support structure. Such systematic changes, they are vital if vulnerable youth are not to be left responsible solely and individually for coping with the effects of powerful digital platforms on their mental health. So, if we are not able to provide this as part of platform regulation and support, their mental health suffers and they are more vulnerable than normal children would be in childhoods which are not platformized or mediated. However, the interesting part here is that societies are not yet ready to provide that kind of support digitally when children are going through these kinds of changes. What is happening is technology is changing at a much faster rate than the society can keep up with. Now, this particular study, it focuses on the social media experiences and digital literacy of young people who have mental health difficulties. Most research on the possible relation between social media use and mental health has generally been conducted with the general youth population. Similarly, most research on digital literacy has been conducted with the general population with little known regarding more vulnerable groups. And this is because digital literacy is typically seen in terms of generic education or workplace skills. It is not seen as a skill by itself, which is why this research gap. Yet, one can say that there is actually little proof that such generic skills improve well-being outcomes, and it may be that new forms of digital literacy are emerging to navigate social media platforms, especially among vulnerable users. So, young people with the kind of skills that they may be using to mitigate the digital platforms, they may not have any connection with the generic skills or education. So, this study investigates vulnerable young people's experiences of the risky digital affordances of social media platforms and also looks at experiences as linked to how the idea of digital literacy is developed. Now, research shows multiple ways in which risks are increasingly entwined with digital engagement, and vulnerable youth has a distinctive need for internet access, including social media, for information, belonging and social and professional support. Banning the internet and internet sources is not a solution, because the young people will have to engage with different kinds of information sources, etc. Now, as digital technologies become embedded, embodied and everyday, relied upon for learning, information, communication, health, participation and work, we actually need social support rather than restricting young people's access. Therefore, the intent is actually not to deny the voices or capacities of young people, but recognize their right to participate in a safe digital world where there is legitimate policy support and resources for them. Now, in a context of a rapid commercial and technological kind of innovation, enhancing users' digital literacy has become a very significant policy goal, where educators, policymakers, regulators, parents, they all talk about developing digital literacy as a policy goal. Now, can it be a protective factor in supporting young people and contributing to their resilience is the question that we have been asking. Now, resilience and coping, they have also been researched under the umbrella of digital literacy. Although young people's capacities to cope in a digital world are not understood. This coping is also interesting, because this coping needs to be qualitatively assessed. Their capacities, they are challenged by the design and operation of social media platforms, which not only host and share content, but also algorithmically promote personalized content according to a commercial winner takes all logic. So, these personalized commercialized content, they create different kinds of impacts on young people's minds. Now, what we also see is that platforms are programmable, multi-sided markets, and they provide a technological framework for others to build on, geared towards connecting to and thriving on also other websites, apps and their data. As you may have noticed, there is a synchronization and a customization of data, where anything that you open in one device using your account gets synced with your other devices in the same account. What is happening is that platformization operates with a logic which is double logic of business interests trumping the user interest, although users are very crucial to platform design and operation. Therefore, when we are thinking about vulnerable young people, the risky affordances are also crucial to think about, where there is extremist content, there is risky content, and there is also content which is uncensored and available for consumption of particularly young people and children. Now, young people engage with social media platforms a lot today, and there are a lot of interest in how young people explore these platforms to express their identities, relationships, opinions. They seek validation and belonging. Now, one of the girls or young people explained in this study says that their learning itself is social. And she says that she has met many people on Snap who have experienced a lot of what she has also experienced. Then it's okay to kind of talk to find out what feelings you actually have inside you. This is a very interesting way of thinking about how young people connect with each other through the mode of the online. So, there is a digital community that they build up. So, they experiment with risk taking and even transgressive behavior, which has been characteristics of adolescence and youth culture. Interestingly, these communities that they build online are based on shared experiences that young people go through. However, they also prioritize efforts to avoid getting hurt or overwhelmed and to find information or help as needed. Many actually take measures to also see that they are self-protected. Friends and online social networks, they become invaluable social support, and therefore, their learnings and motivations, they intensify the interest in the platform specificities, where everything becomes searchable. So, if there is something which they do not know, they would Google it or ask artificial intelligence. So, there is a possibility of finding the answers in the platforms that are digital in nature. Now, awareness of an exposure to extreme digital experiences. While many platform users report extreme experiences at times, the vulnerable young people seemed especially likely to do so and particularly sensitive to them. It is also because of the age and the social context that the young people are in. And this fits with prior research findings that vulnerable young people are more exposed to extreme content on violence, extremism, self-harm, contact, meeting strangers, and also conduct, sexual harassment risks, etc. We had also earlier talked about how video games like PUBG create an impact on young people's minds, and they even take steps such as taking their own lives in the process. So, one sees that the sensitivity that young people have when it comes to being exposed to these digital platforms, it's actually manifold. When they for parents now, this is also a crisis which they see as a part of social transformation, and this is where works like those by Sonia Livingstone and many others become very useful to understand this process of digital transformation, which is also socially connected. So, when parents look at their child holding a smartphone, there is nothing that seems to be more symbolic of the change from their own childhood because of the presence of digital technology today. But there are also other changes that have affected family life, like living further away from their own families of origin, not having extended networks of support, loss of social support, etc. And a lot of the broader social shifts impacting families are invisible to them because they are slow, gradual changes. Parenting also takes place, as Livingstone would argue, between a remembered past and an imagined future. So, there is a hint of a creation of a nostalgia, but also moving forward towards a future which is better than the past. Interestingly, parents look back at the time when using media and technology was a choice. They see it as an era where it was not a part of one's everyday as it is today. More and more, today digital is a default. It is a default way to learn, engage with family and spend time, and parents are still trying to find their way through this. Generally, what parents are also doing is trying to embrace the digital world at one side. On one side, they also resist it, and for some others, they are trying to seek a balance, which is most parents. Resisting or embracing is very strategic, and the way that parents incorporate digital behavior into their child's lives again is strategically done through a lot of thinking through the process. What we also find here is Livingstone's emphasis on families which would be aware, educated and also supportive to think through these issues, where children's rights, platform literacy, etc., become issues of importance. If one looks at many countries in the global south, these issues will not even be seen as important because there is no digital literacy or platform awareness or concern about young people's futures. Now, research authors Sonia Livingstone and Alicia Blum-Ross, they spoke to Intermedia about the hopes, fears and needs of widely diverse parents, which we are going to discuss now. Basically, where we are thinking about parenting for a digital future, and it is based on in-depth studies of how families approach and self-regulate the highly mediated world they inhabit. This is a very important point, that self-regulation and self-censorship, they operate together and simultaneously, where parents may regulate how their children use social media. And this particular work, it explores the choices being made by parents around children's use of digital technology at a time when advice and guidance is either absent or out of step with the nuanced realities of digital life. Rather than basically present a how-to guide, the authors also seek to acknowledge the balancing act that parents are engaged in, understand how values and attitudes shape children's digital experiences and provide realistic insight into basically the reassurance and support both parents and children need. Livingstone and Alicia Blum-Ross argue that this is a very unusual, unprecedented kind of digital transformation that we are a part of, which is why both parents and children need to be sat with and also talked to about what kind of changes we are going through. And this particular book, it invites parents, policymakers and professionals across health, education, media, telecommunication and technology to basically talk about how to raise a child in the 21st century. Parents often think, what should we do now? How would it help my child? But nobody knows the answer in their fullest. But nobody knows the answer to the fullest, because this generation is living through it together, and there is a lot of structural pressures along with the compounding digital transformations. So, what we have is unknown factors piling up and parents being worried about many of these things, and the parents are more likely to actually embrace the digital world if they feel that they have a way into the future, because there is a good future that technology guarantees. They will see the digital as the ideal way of taking their child forward and perhaps also overcoming problems if they are also able to be invested and aware digitally. If there is a disconnect between parents and their children digitally, it actually hampers the child's well-being, because the parents are also unable to understand the need of digital literacy. So, people have a reason to invest in and use digital technology. For example, in many cases like assistive technology for children with disability. as we had been discussing, disabled representations in media particularly conform to certain ideas of persons with disability. But when we think about technology and media for children with disability, how children and parents engage with that media would be very different, and there needs to be better discussion on these issues. Of the parents that they try to resist, not all are successful, and this success is also dependent on how the rest of the peer group and the world functions. So, what we see is that the parents who are most likely to balance are not so much comfortably trying to find a halfway between the embracing and the resisting, but constantly putting an effort into finding a balance. So, this balance is also a lot of effort where parents have to regulate their children's use of media at one stage and then also encourage them to use it at another stage. Now, it is also a balance between wanting something positive about the future, but fearing that future as well. So, in a way what we see is Livingstone and Alicia Blum-Ross's discussions and conversations with many families who have been struggling to parent in a digital technological transformative kind of world, and therefore the desire to bring these insights to talk about a social change which is happening at an unprecedented rate. One thing both the authors were struck by is also how few sources of advice parents feel that they have when it comes to digital platforms. So, the idea is that parents are asked to figure it out on their own without much of policy and resource kind of support, which is something that Livingstone and Blum-Ross argue for, that families are diverse and their parenting needs and interests are varied, particularly when we think about this unprecedented digital transformation, which is why parents and children both should be consulted in the making of regulations, campaigns, messages and tools, and there should be more co-creation and co-design of primarily policies, regulations, etc. There also needs to be more joined thinking and development of professionals who support parents who are going through this kind of social transformation. Now, throughout this lecture, what I have tried to do is bring forth arguments that talk about how the mediatized world is facilitating a kind of change with children and young people, and then how parents are trying to deal with these changes. One sees that young people, especially those with mental health difficulties, need better support when it comes to platform and digital literacy and protect their vulnerabilities. What we also see is the changes that are a part of this digital transformation and in the manner in which they are taking place. So, this is where I will end this lecture on this note that we can see that a social process and a stage of socialization like childhood and youth are going through unprecedented changes because of how the world is increasingly mediatized and digitized now, and it is therefore also something which sociologists need to think about. Thank you.